All right, so we're going to talk about maintaining your system as far as filtration goes. So, first and foremost, you have your pre-filter housings. A sediment and a chloramine filter come with your max power. So, this is your first line of defense in protecting your RO membranes. So these two filters are the filters that you're going to have to change the most. Now, when should you change your pre-filter? Well, there's a couple indications that they need to change. First is obvious, physical appearance. You may see that your filter has turned brown, it's turned a dark color, it's been used. At that point, it's ready for a change. However, if you've used your system enough and you realize you've reached a point where there's a significant loss in flow that's kind of consistent, that also means that your pre-filters are requiring a change because they've reached that kind of capacity. So, how do you change your pre-filters? Well, right now I have water in the system, so you may notice it is going to get a little wet. So we're going to go ahead and get a towel here. So, to replace your sediment filter, I'm going to go ahead. It may be a little snug in here, so I'm going to take out our filter wrench and align it in between the grooves. And we're going to go ahead and loosen. Now, these housings are upside down, meaning you're going to go lefty-loosey to loosen. That also means that any trapped water in here is going to flow either out or right over you. So bear that in mind. This is a messy filter change. So I should point out that with a sediment filter, there is no O-ring seal. It is simply a filter that can go in any direction as long as you line it up. You'll notice at the bottom of your pre-filter bowls is a little notch. You'll align your filter with the notch as well as the notch on your pre-filter cap. We'll go ahead and install, and just like that, simple. Same thing could be said for your chloramine filter. Now, for example's sake, I have a chloramine filter out here. And if I were to change this filter, well, you have two different O-rings on here. It does not matter which end faces up. All that matters is that you're aligning with the notch right there in the center. And if you want a better seal, this is where your magic lube will come in handy, where you can lubricate your O-ring here, as well as the O-ring to your pre-filter housing. That just allows for a better seal, better performance. That being said, now if you find that you have a leak between the clear bowl and the black cap, most of the time, that just means this housing needs a little bit more of a snug, or the O-ring is either damaged or warped, or that O-ring just needs a little bit of that magic lube. So it's important, every time you change your filters, keep up with your lubrication. Keeps your O-rings healthy. So next, after your pre-filters, you have your membranes. Now, your RO membranes are going to move about 95 to 99% of TDS, total dissolved solids, from your water. Meaning, these filters are the filters that you want to both protect and not have to worry about changing as often if it's protected. A membrane should give you about a year's worth of water flow. Highly dependent on the maintenance and what kind of water is present, but you're going to get about a year from both of these membranes. So, how do you go about changing an RO membrane? Well, on our systems here, we have 14 millimeter bolts and nuts holding the clamps to the ROs. However, on some older models, we have sent out bolts and hardware that is bluish in tint, At that point, you can utilize a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter wrench for removing your filters. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen the hardware here. You'll want to make sure you loosen each bolt slightly before fully removing. That'll minimize the amount of tension from the opposite end when you're removing your bolt. At that point, your clamp will be able to move around, and even you can use your finger on the nut. It's important not to lose your hardware. So, good habit is immediately reattach. A good habit is to automatically reattach your nut to your bolt so you don't lose it. Next, you'll want to make sure that you have some sort of flat head, whether it's a large one for more leverage or a thinner one for getting in between. You'll notice you have the RO cap and the stainless steel housing here. And there's not much of a gap in between here. Now on the RO cap, you'll notice a lip here. This lip is what you're going to utilize to help remove this cap. This cap is usually on there pretty snug. So when it comes to changing your membrane, it's going to need a little assistance. So what I'm doing here is I'm currently stepping on the frame. I'm currently stepping on the frame to help secure it. And simply take a hammer, take that flathead. We're going to tap it upward so we can open it like a paint can. Some caps may be more difficult than others, but at this point, you'll start to notice a gap between the plastic and the metal. Utilize your flathead. We're going to go around and pop the cap upward. Now, sometimes you may have the cap come out nice and freely. In other cases, you may lift up and notice your membrane is rising with your cap. At that point, you'll notice at the end of your cap, there's going to be like a little gap that you'll be able to fit your flathead in between. At that point, you'll want to go through the side. That way you don't damage any of the center part of your cap or the existing membrane. I'm going to go ahead and take out the old membrane. So now, I have a pair of channel locks here, which you can use pliers. You'll want to go ahead and reach for the spindle. Don't grab from the center. Reach for a spindle, step on the frame, and using both arms, lift upward. Most of the time, it'll pop out from the bottom cap. You may need a little bit of a twist. And at that point, you'll be able to remove your membrane and install your new one. We're going to go ahead and treat this like our new membrane here. So I'm going to point out some things on the membrane that are important. So you'll notice one end of the membrane has an O-ring seal. It's actually a brine seal here. And then the other end has nothing. Depending on what kind of membrane you have, you actually have arrows dictating which way the flow should be. Now, on our systems, you'll want to make sure that when you're installing your membrane, that this brine seal here not only gets a little lubrication, but make sure that it's facing upward. Because this is the inlet side of your RO membrane. It's designed to flow a certain way so it can purify. You want to make sure that there is a good seal present so you can force the water through the center to get excellent purification. So I'm going to go ahead and lubricate our seal. Go ahead here. Simply just take a little bit of magic lube. Apply it to your O-ring. And then we're going to go ahead and drop this in. You'll also notice on your RO cap, you have 2 O-rings here on the outside, and then 2 O-rings on the center. The outer rings help seal the cap, while the inner rings help seal the pure water. Because right here, through the center of your membrane, that's where your pure water is going to travel. So this helps keep that seal nice and proper. I'm going to go ahead and push down on the cap. It may require some force, but as you see, once the cap meets the metal, you're good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and install the clamps. So you'll notice both the black cap and the metal housing have a similar shape here. Now this shape correlates with the clamp, and that is where you want a portion of the metal clamp on the plastic cap and on the metal housing. So you'll see the clamp is intended to hug both of these together. And you'll notice you'll have a small lip of the cap. You do not want to put your clamps below this point, meaning you don't want your clamps anywhere in this region, because these housings get pressurized, and at that point this cap is a free-floating cap waiting to blow. So you really want to make sure that when you're installing your membrane that you're hugging both the metal and the plastic. And then to reattach, simply back out that nut, reattach on the other end, and you'll know that you've got it in the right spot because you can spin it around nice and loose and it's not going to fall down. So we have our clamp positioned here, and now we're going to go ahead, take our 14mm wrench and drill. I'm going to go ahead and close up the clamps until they're about touching. You know, you want to see maybe a millimeter in between the clamps. You want to make sure that they're making a good connection, a nice tight grip on this RO housing. With proper maintenance, you're only going to change your RO membrane really every year. Maybe you'll get a little more, but it's really dependent on that maintenance. So that's how you change your membranes. Now, on the max power, we have a 10-inch DI. Now that 10-inch DI can be loosened with the large filter wrench. Now, this cap sits opposite of the pre-filter housings. So while they are upside down and you have lefty-loosey, well, in reality, this is the opposite. So when you have your filter wrench on and you are behind the system, you should have the handle on the right side. And behind the system, handle's on the right, and I'm going to pull towards me. At that point, you've loosened up your housing. It's tricky to remember, but as long as you have the handle on the right side, you pull towards you, you know that you're at least going in the right direction. So now we have our DI, which is our deionization chamber, which has a cartridge full of resin. Now, we'll point out the resin cartridge first. Now, this is the cartridge that contains the filter media, meaning in here we have our resin. Now, resin, there we go. We have our resin. So you'll see resin comes in the form of beads here. These resin beads will remove charges from the water via contact of water molecules. And basically, as long as you have a nicely packed and properly filled resin cartridge, then water is going to travel through all these beads, have their ions separated to give that final polish of zero pure water, zero TDS. So we both offer a filled version in-house that you can just purchase swap out and simply replace with your new cartridge, as well as offering the resin media that is used to fill this cartridge. Now, I should advise you, if you are filling resin yourself, it's important that you overpack this cartridge. And many people's opinions of overly packed can vary. So an easy way to kind of check yourself is to quite literally overfill this cartridge. Pack it in, kind of fill it like a sand bucket. You want to go maybe an inch over the cartridge, yes, and push down. If you physically pack it down, you're allowing any of that extra space that's kind of creeping down in here to get filled up with resin media. You don't want to have any gaps, because that'll create channeling, which is basically where the resin is grouped together. Not every molecule is getting hit, and you're having varied TDS results. So I found that overpacking it to the point where I can't even twist it down is where you want to be. Why? Because the second you get the cap aligned with that mess of resin, tap it down on the table. Give it 5 to 10 taps. And you'll see, even as you're trying to tighten it down, you'll feel the resin media begin to compress. Now, how can you be fully sure you've put enough resin in here? Well, give it a few taps and give it a shake. If you can feel the media moving around, there's not enough resin in there. If you can hear the media moving around, top it off anyway. The most common resin issues have to do with the amount of resin present in the chamber. So it's important. Tightly pack your resin cartridges. Now, the other important thing to mention as far as resin is concerned is you'll notice on this cartridge, you have one end with no ring. You have a filter on the inside. And then you have the other end, which has another filter ring here, and then an O-ring here. Now, this end with the O-ring, much like the membrane, is intended to face upward. That is how water is intended to travel through the media and filter through. So one important thing you want to make sure, actually multiple important things you want to look for, and that is lubricating this seal. Making sure that this seal is lubricated and seated properly. That way, this cartridge can perform as intended. You want to make sure that this is making good contact with the cartridge, as well as making a centered contact with the cap, which I'll show you as we are tightening back into the housing. The other thing to pay attention to, and this is more so for those who fill your cartridge, open this up again, you'll notice you have a donut-styled filter that is present on the cap end. You'll also notice there's another ring tucked underneath here. So if you are filling the cartridge yourself, say you bought an empty cartridge, make sure that you press in your filter donut to both ends of the cap, meaning you press in the bottom one, then fill your media, then you seed this to the top cap. You don't want to fill your media, then place this guy here, and then close everything down. You're not making a tight enough seal. You're making a bad connection, and you're going to have some skewed results. So bear that in mind. A little goes a long way, I should say. You don't want to over lubricate. I'm also going to dump the water that was present. Okay, so we have our new cartridge. In the center of your DI bowl, you'll notice a similar notch, kind of like how the pre-filters have. And you'll notice a depression here on your cartridge. You'll want to make sure that you align your cartridge with that notch on the bowl. Now, I should point out, you can kind of see how your cartridge can move around. So bear that in mind when you are tightening your cartridge back into the housing. You don't want to speed this process. You don't want to rush. you don't want to risk having a bad seal resulting in bad performance. So, what I recommend, simply guide the cartridge with this hand and then align up with the threads and slowly attach. You don't want to spin it too quick. You don't want to risk that little O-ring to fall out of place and create a bad seal. You don't want the cartridge itself to move around and create a bad seal, because it's very difficult at that point to determine what's going on in my resin chamber. So if you take care when you are doing your resin changes, your system's going to treat you a lot better. Now, how often should I be changing this resin chamber? Well, the rule of thumb is 10 ppm or more. It's time for a resin change. So bear in mind that when your system reaches about 10 ppm from enough usage, it's time for a resin change. Simply change your resin, and that should get you back to zero. If that does not get you back to zero, then it's time for some troubleshooting. We're going to go ahead and talk about troubleshooting the max power.